As of recording this, it is April 23rd, and here I am on April 23rd recording a Kings season review. This is not what I wanted to have been doing on April 23rd. I wanted to be recapping the latest Kings playoff game, right? But that's not where this season took us. This season took us a different route. And, there are some positives to that. The positives being I get to watch some stress-free basketball and just chill and watch Jamal Murray make Lakers fans suffer and watch the refs screw over the Sixers, without being too stressed about it. Imagine if that was the Kings getting screwed by the refs. That'd be awful. So there are some positives to it, but obviously we want to be in the playoffs, and it's disappointing that we weren't. And disappointing was the word that I kept hearing listening to the Kings players' exit interviews. It was a disappointing season. Fox saying, if we just made our free throws, we could be a 51-win team. You hear Sabonis constantly talking about putting ourselves in a bad situation by losing games that we shouldn't lose. You hear Malik Monk talking about, if I was playing, we would be playing right now. And so there's no doubt this season was disappointing. And I think the crazy part about that is you look at the Kings record, 46-36. Imagine 2 years ago saying that we're going to be disappointed after a 46-36 season from the Kings. I mean, that is crazy. It's the second winning season under a head coach that isn't Rick Adelman in the Sacramento era. That's insane. I mean, Mike Brown's 2 for 2 on winning seasons, and he deserves all the credit in the world for that. But the Western Conference is insane. I mean, coming into the season, you had 10 teams that were going to be vying for the playoffs, and 2 of those teams were going to be extremely disappointed, and the Kings were one of those teams, along with the Warriors. And I think it was just a season of missed opportunities and kind of what ifs. What if the Kings could make a free throw? What if the refs call that foul on Colby Jones getting hit in the face as he goes up for the winning putback? What if the Kings could just run a play down the stretch of a game where they didn't turn the ball over? What if Malik Monk and or Kevin Huerter don't get injured down the stretch of the season? It's a lot of what ifs. And honestly, the end of this season is kind of what I thought the end of last season would be like when we were, in the middle of last season. I was like, we're in a good spot right now, but we haven't been in this spot before. I feel like we're going to kind of crumble towards the end of the season. We need to make sure we get this top 6 because I don't want to be in a play-in game. But instead, we just kept going up and got a top 3 seed with only a few more wins than we got this season. And so it's wild when you look at the win totals of the Western Conference. And if we were in the East, we'd be vying for a home court advantage probably. But that's just not the reality of the situation. The reality of this situation is we are a Western Conference team, and that kind of sucks. And it's not going to stop anytime soon being this difficult. You have Victor Wembanyama coming up. You got, the Rockets coming up. Hopefully some teams will drop off, like maybe the Lakers or the Warriors. But the Western Conference is just always the tougher conference. I mean, it's the reason we had a playoff drought in the first place. If we were in the East, I doubt that would have been the case. And so it's the reality of the situation. And being 46-36 isn't good enough in the Western Conference. And so it's disappointing. But I've also heard words of, disaster. But maybe on the other side, it's a stepping stone towards progress. And so I'm going to talk about, what really is it? What can we take away from this season? Where did the team improve? Where did the team get worse? What's sustainable? I'm definitely going to make an off-season kind of preview, looking ahead, what the Kings are going to do this offseason. A lot of that is going to revolve around Malik Monk, just because he's super important to this team and his situation is pretty complicated. But we'll save that for another time. But right now, we're going to review this season. And last season, I did a mid-season grades. I did end of the season grades for players. This season, I did a mid-season grades. But here, I'm going to do it a little bit differently because I tried it. I gave it a chance doing these grades, doing the, rating players out of 10. And, that's what a lot of people do. You rate them out of 10 or you go, A, B, C, D, F, right? And I think that's just a way to get engagement, get people to be mad at you or agree with you and or whatever. But I don't know. I don't like just slapping a number on a player and being like, that's what their season was. It was a 5 out of 10, a 7 out of 10, a 3 out of 10. I don't really like doing that because I think when you look at an 82 game season, or in the Kings case, an 84 game season as a whole, it's a lot more complex than just slapping a number on a player. And so I am, like the ones I've done before, going to go through each individual player, but I'm just going to talk about them. I'm not slapping a label on them, although I'm definitely going to talk about whether they've progressed from, if they were on the team last season, whether they've progressed, regressed, what we think the future holds for them. So I'm going to start, I already talked about the team as a whole a little bit, but going to start with the team as a whole. Coming in, the expectations were playoffs. I think the expectations were playoffs and the hopes were top 6. Now, for a lot of the season, they were in the top 6 or they were hovering right around it. Going into the very end of the season, they had a chance still at top 6. And because of a lot of the what ifs, like I talked about, they weren't able to get into the top 6 and they slid all the way down to 9 in the Western Conference. And I think in a lot of ways, they just looked like a young, inexperienced team that I expected for that to happen the season before. And so it was a disappointing season, but I think what we have to realize before we slap a label of like disaster on this season, I think we need to look at, one, the injuries that happened late in the season. I mean, not having Malik Monk. I mean, it exposed a serious flaw in the roster that we don't have other shot creators, but not having Malik Monk and Kevin Huerter is really, really tough, especially going into a play-in game. And we did win one play-in game, so that can be seen as somewhat of a success. But like the situations of other teams needs to be taken into account when you look at last season compared to this season. Like I said earlier, the West just got better and growth isn't linear. That's something that a lot of people say, not just with the Kings, with every team, growth is not linear. You see it with a lot of teams. And so yes, the Kings went down in the standings. Their record went down slightly. They didn't make the playoffs, but I think there's a lot of things to like out of what we saw this season. Defensively, taking a big jump up to 14th in the league. The Kings have an average defense. I mean, it's incredible. What did we say? The Kings need to just have an average defense as long as they continue offensively. But that's the thing. The offense regressed. I think it was normal for it to regress a bit, at least in terms of where they are in the league. I think when you look at the offensive rating, it's not that different from last season, but offenses in the NBA just continue to go up. Although I think that'll change with the way officiating has changed towards the end of the season. But it's how much the offense slid down in the rankings that's a bit concerning. And so like I say, with that Malik Monk injury, it exposed a need. The Kings need more shot creation. But defensively, I think we clearly saw that this team can be good defensively, especially when you insert another defensive player like Keon Ellis into the starting lineup. Imagine what would happen if we also had a competent defender at the 4 spot. The whole narrative around not being able to build a good defense, or at least an average defense, around Sabonis being your defensive anchor was completely proven false. And I mean, even in the playoffs last season, you saw the Kings' defense was actually the strength, and the offense is what really got us eliminated against the Warriors. The offense just couldn't do anything, and that's why we got eliminated. And again, this season, in the postseason games, in the play-in games, it was the defense that was carrying us. And so honestly, I see that as a good thing, that this team is not just one-dimensional, and that, they don't just need to focus on one side of the ball. They just need to focus on getting talent together as a whole. But they showed that they could be good on both sides of the ball, and now they just need to be able to put it together, and I think it is very possible that they can do that. So let's move on to the individual players, and let's start at the top with De'Aaron Fox. I think every season of Fox's career is up and down. It's a long regular season, and some guys are more consistent than others. I think he's just a guy that he goes up and down throughout a regular season, like big ups and big downs. And so it was just normal in that sense. And that's on the offensive side of the ball. I think where he really improved was on the defensive side of the ball. That was one thing that didn't have its ups and downs. He came out every single game and gave it everything defensively. And he improved from last season, but last season he had even improved defensively. And so he took an even bigger leap this season, leading the league in steals. Now, leading the league in steals doesn't mean you're a great defender, because steals, they're great, but if they're leaving you out of position, they're not so great if you're, attempting them and don't get them. But I think with Fox, he did a really good job of being super disruptive, getting tons of deflections, and he was a big part of the Kings' improvement defensively, because the Kings really struggled at the point of attack last season, and they were much improved there this season. I think it also helps when he doesn't have to guard the other team's best perimeter player, when he doesn't have to guard Steph Curry, because Keegan can do it, or Keon can do it, or Davion can do it. I think that allows him to both at times rest a little bit, but at other times kind of search out for those steals and deflections, not having to guard the ball. Now, offensively, the big change was his shot diet. A lot more threes, a lot less mid-rangers. He started off the season super hot from three, and he did improve from three, and that's huge for him. Him being a three-point threat is just a nightmare for other teams. But I think this season was kind of a learning experience for him, of learning how and when to use that three-point shot, because he's not Steph Curry. And so there were times where he definitely took too many threes. And what that did was it put the rest of the Kings offense in a poor spot, because when he's not getting downhill, when he's not drawing that attention in the paint or inside the three-point arc, his playmaking went way down, not getting others involved, not causing the defense to move. And so that just hurt the Kings offense as a whole. So I think there's very much a time and a place for him to use the three-pointer, and this was a learning experience for him. And so I just think he needs to have better shot selection as we go forward. And obviously coming off a season where he was clutch player of the year, just could do no wrong in the clutch. Every clutch statistic pointed towards him being the clutch player of the year. This season was much different. The Kings were pretty bad when it came to clutch time offense. There's one thing you can't say about Fox, and that's that he doesn't rise to the occasion. He knows when it's his time to take over in the big moments. He knows that he's the guy that has to do it. And I think even saying that, in the play-in games, he was getting inside more and getting to the mid-ranger more. So I think you could already see that shot selection improvement when it came to the biggest moments. But in the clutch, he like I said, he settled for too many threes in the clutch, I think. Didn't make a lot of them. And I just thought his playmaking was poor. He wasn't able to find the right passes when the defense would collapse on him as much as he did a season before. And he just wasn't able to make the right decisions as much in the clutch. And the Kings' clutch offense as a whole was just awful. Just so many turnovers, so much stagnation, just giving the ball to even guys like Harrison Barnes or Keon Ellis. Like, why are you giving the ball to Keon Ellis in the clutch to just try to dribble around? I mean, some of it was just baffling. And so it's definitely not all on him, but he did not perform well. He turned the ball over a lot. His shooting percentages were bad. And so that's somewhere that I hope we see improvement. And I think with him, he has the potential to be a top 15, top 10, maybe even player in this league. But that comes down to just being more consistent throughout the season. Not just getting it going in the big moments in the playoffs, because look what happens when you don't do it consistently throughout a season. You only win 46 games, and you're the 9th seed, and you're in the play-in, and you don't even make the playoffs. And so obviously he still had a good season. Statistically, he had a great season. Wasn't an all-star, and he was right on the line of whether he deserved to be or not. But I think it's just about finding a little more consistency and finding that right shot diet. Moving on, we go obviously to Domantas Sabonis. Sabonis had an incredible season last year, and then even improved this year in pretty much every way. Led the league in triple doubles. We all know about his double streak. Just insane consistency. Played all 82 games. And just, I think when you look at him versus Fox, Sabonis is the type of guy that's going to give you that consistency through the 82 games, but he's not going to give you the high highs that Fox gives you. But still, what he did in the regular season was really incredible. I thought he improved defensively. He did not get in foul trouble as much, was very good when it came to contesting at the rim. And he's always been or at least since he got to the Kings, he's always been a pretty good perimeter defender, even when he gets switched onto smaller guards. And so he was solid defensively. Offensively, his three-point percentage was 38%. And he did that on 1 attempt per game. And so that's a really solid percentage, but not on the biggest sample sizes, but still 1 attempt per game. I mean, it's 1 per game. So he was shooting them. The outside shot for him was a big talking point. I think a little bit too much of a talking point. People blaming him not being able to hit mid-rangers or threes as to why the Kings lost, which I just don't really think is, I think it gets overblown a bit as to why they lost in the playoffs last season. But still, he came out and he shot much better percentages from the perimeter and looked confident in doing so. And he still shot really well around the rim, won the rebounding title. I talked about it earlier in the team segment, but it wasn't even just him, but just like the team proving that he could be the anchor of a solid defense. And so, I mean, there were just so many talking points going into this season about him and being overrated and all things like that. And there's no doubt people still think that just because they don't like the way he plays. I mean, you see it with a lot of big guys. People just don't like big guys, and that's fine. He performed well in the play-in against the Warriors. He performed well against the Pelicans in the play-in, I thought. So in those important games, I thought he played well. He was able to actually up his assist numbers despite one of his biggest partners in Kevin Huerter having a really down season, and also Keegan Murray shooting way worse on just threes in general, but especially on the dribble handoff. And so really, there wasn't much more that I could ask from Sabonis. I feel like he's just the type of guy that goes out there and does exactly what you need to do, and you know what you're going to get. I've said it from the very start of last season, but Fox, for the Kings to go far, Fox has to be the guy, but Sabonis is a great partner to be able to make both Fox and everyone else around him look way better. And so you just saw more of that this season. He just makes everyone look better. And so just a really great season from Sabonis. I do think next season, maybe he should shoot, like, instead of 1 3-pointer a game, we could go to 2, or we could go to 1.5 and a few more mid-rangers. Like, I think that's feasible, but also not necessary. And I think just with where Sabonis is right now is totally fine, and we just need to improve the roster around him. And so let's move on to the next guy, who I guess we'll talk about Keegan Murray next. With Keegan, I mean, this team, a large part of this team's future depends on Keegan Murray. Now, this is a season review, not a, future seasons preview, but we all know that Keegan Murray's development is extremely key to how far this team can go. And the offseason was all about him expanding his offensive game. We were hearing about him and Fox in the one-on-ones, and Fox was beating him pretty much every time, but he was still getting better. And then we had Summer League, or, the California Classic. So not Vegas. He didn't play in Vegas, but in the California Classic, he had, I think it was 2 great games, and I especially remember the one against the Heat where he just went off, and you could see the off the dribble potential. The first play of the game, he just went right down the middle of the lane and dunked on somebody. And so we were all hyped about his offensive development. And then the season starts, and it's like, this dude's an elite defender now. Like, what happened? He was an absolute traffic cone last season, and now he's out there guarding Steph Curry and Donovan Mitchell and locking them up. Like, what is happening? And so the defensive progress that he made, it was just so huge when it came to the defensive improvements of this team as a whole. Like, there are other spots, I talked about Fox and Sabonis being better defensively, and inserting Keon, him being solid defensively. But Keegan Murray's development is the number one reason that this team's defense improved. I mean, we had we now have like a true stopper. And it's wild because I didn't predict that. I think last season I was talking about how Keegan can become a solid defender, but I don't think he'll ever be great. And then he's great right now, apparently. Now, there are definitely times where you could see he was still learning a bit, but for the most part, he was so good defensively on the perimeter, and he was blocking shots, getting steals. He averaged 1 steal and almost a block per game. And so that was huge. On the offensive side, though, his 3-point percentage dipped from, what was it last season? Over 40%, right? To 35.8% on 6.5 attempts per game. That's not great. But then we do see games of him going, 12 for his first 13 from 3 against Utah. And we see him against the Warriors going off. But then, we see a game against the Pelicans in the play-in where he can't hit anything. And so I've never been too worried about his shooting taking a step back, especially when you look at the workload that he was taking on defensively, being a second-year player, a little bit of a sophomore slump when he's focusing on the defensive end. I think, playing those one-on-ones against Fox, we thought, his off-the-dribble game is improving. But no, it was the defensive side that was really improving. But we did see him scoring more off the dribble. We saw him getting into that mid-range and stopping and pulling up. And then we saw him getting to the rim more and dunking the ball. But then there were definitely other times where you could see he still was uncomfortable with the ball a bit. And when teams would really press up on him, those good defenders would really press up on him, he struggled. But I think overall what we saw from him offensively was actually good. Because I do think you saw progression from the start of the season. I remember I felt like there were so many opportunities where he could stop, pull up in that mid-range, and just rise over a guy. But he wasn't really doing it, and he would get his feet wrong. And I think you saw improvement as the season went on. And we saw him showing more of an ability to attack the basket off the dribble. And I'm not at all worried about his 3-point shot. And so for him, it was a little up and down. And you could still see when he goes to the rim, he wants to dunk the ball. And sometimes he just has his mind set to that and he gets blocked, or he realizes, I'm going to get blocked, and then tries to bail out of it, and it doesn't look good. So he's definitely not perfect there. I think he needs to improve on his playmaking when he is attacking, or just his finishing in other ways. I'm not at all confident in him running the fast break. So there's still a lot of improvement that needs to be done when it comes to his off the dribble game. But I think when you look at his perimeter game and the way he gets into the mid-range, those shots are going to fall more next season. And I expect a pretty substantial jump in his points per game. And so the hope is with him, this was the defensive progression season. And next season, we'll see that more offensive explosion while maintaining that defense. That's the hope. And so would we have liked to see better 3-point percentages from him this season? Absolutely. But I think the flashes that he showed offensively were enough for me to be excited about the future. And the defensive progression was so important to this team. And then the next guy to talk about is Malik Monk. And I think very clearly there were 4 guys on the Kings this season that were very clearly a top 4 when it came to importance. And so the first 3 that I talked about plus Malik Monk. Last season, Malik, really good, but a little inconsistent. This season, Malik, super consistent. Now, his 3-point shot wasn't always consistent, that's for sure. But for the most part, he was way more consistent this season. And he did it in multiple ways, upping his scoring average to 15.4 a game, which we needed with the regression of Harrison Barnes and the slump of Kevin Huerter. But then also, I don't know why he only played 26 minutes per game, obviously coming off the bench in every single one of his 72 games. I would have liked to see him more at the 30 minutes per game mark. It was always a little weird to me how little he played, especially with the struggles of Kevin Huerter. But still, at the end of games, he was such an important player, the primary ball handler for this team. And you could see when the Kings didn't have him out there, either just because he was having a bad game, so they didn't have him out there, like against the Magic, which was stupid, or when he was injured. This team was just awful. in the clutch when they didn't have Malik Monk. He's the primary ball handler, the primary playmaker. 5 assists per game, 15 points per game. He made everyone around him so much better. I think last season he was very chaotic, and he still was chaotic this season, but that could be good or bad. Whereas this season, I feel like that chaos was almost always good. And he just became such a good playmaker, operating out of either the dribble handoff or out of the pick and roll. The clear sixth man of the year for me, maybe by the time you're watching this, that's been announced, but clearly the sixth man of the year for me. And I don't think I could have asked for a better season from Malik, and this team will be in a very rough spot if he leaves. But I'm not going to talk about that now. But they'll be in a very tough spot. Just the perfect season from him. So now after those top four, we get into, a lot of those top four pretty positive, like very good seasons. Now we get into, a little worse of seasons from the next guys. So I guess let's start at Harrison Barnes. Harrison Barnes, who signed a new 3-year deal, 18 mil a year before this season, played all 82 games. The Iron Man was a good 3-point shooter, consistent there, 38.7% on the year. That was very important. But where he dropped off was the way he attacked the baskets. Now we saw flashes of it every now and then, early in the season against Utah, and then there were a few moments throughout the season, and he actually was very key in both of the play-in games. He was really good against the Warriors, and one of the few Kings that showed up offensively against the Pelicans, but he didn't draw nearly as many fouls per game. He didn't get to the free throw line as much. And that was a big reason that the Kings' free throw percentage dropped. Not because someone shot worse, but because it was just he, who is a good free throw shooter, shot less, a lot less. There were times where he would just disappear offensively. And so, shout out to him for stepping up in the big moments in the postseason, but it definitely was disappointing just how often he would disappear during the regular season. And then on the defensive end, last season he wasn't a good defender. This season, it got way worse. But it also was confusing because at times he would play good defense against Zion Williamson or against, some really good player, or even like LeBron. But for the most part, he looked so old. He's not that old. Was he 31 years old? But the amount of times where he just couldn't get around a screen or would get slightly hit and would lose his balance. That's the thing, his balance. Somehow his balance just got way worse this year, I feel like. And he was constantly getting thrown off balance on both ends of the court, really. We know he's not the fastest player anymore, not a great rebounder. And so it hurt when he's kind of ghosting offensively and he's not a positive defender. It hurt to have him on the court sometimes. And, the contract that he signed, it's still fine, right? Right now it's 2 years with $36 million left. That's fine. It's not a big deal. But it definitely was disappointing that it felt like he fell off a lot, and he's not that old or anything. He's getting up there, but 31 is nothing crazy. I think his position, it always has been the obvious one that could be upgraded along with the shooting guard position. And he definitely still adds to this team. He started every single game. It's not like he ever played so bad that he lost his starting spot. And we could see him going into next season still as the starter, and it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but still a bit of a disappointing season for him. The next guy, Kevin Huerter, obviously unfortunate how his season ended, getting injured, but he should be good to go for next season. But he's the guy who he really fell off from last season. He went from 15 points per game to 10 points per game, went from a 40+% three-point shooter to 36%. Still wild to me that he can't shoot over 80% from the free throw line, only 76%. Lost his starting spot at different times throughout the season. In preseason, there was a thought that Duarte could start in front of him. He lost it in the middle of the season, regained it back, then got injured. He was such an important part of what made the Kings offense great last season. And so we didn't have it this season. It just felt like he lost confidence. There were very few times where he got hot. Last season, there were a lot of times he got hot and cold, but he would go in between them. This season, it felt like almost the entire season was him being cold from everywhere on the court. And he also wasn't that great, or not as good as he was last season, at operating from within the point line and scoring either in the mid range or getting to the floater or his secondary playmaking. It just felt like he dropped off every way imaginable offensively. Defensively, not a great defender. Also, not the worst defender, though. Nothing really changed there. But offensively, if he's here at the start of next season, I mean, I expect a bounce back. I just don't think he can be this bad because he's shown throughout his career, like it's not the longest career, but he's not a 36% shooter from three. He's better than that. I believe he will be better than that next season. We got to remember he's only 25 years old. It's not like he's, 30. His decline, one of the biggest reasons the Kings offense declined, just because that dribble handoff game wasn't as lethal with him. I mean, he was at the top of like every dribble handoff statistic last season and nowhere near that this season. And so we need him to be better going forward. So let's go now to Trey Lyles, who missed the start of the season due to injury, but he really just did his thing. He was normal Trey Lyles, providing a spark off the bench, being a really solid rebounder, shooting 38.4% from three, very, very good. Also, when needed, being able to drive to the basket. Just a really solid season from him. Did what we needed him to do. It stepped in late in games when Kevin Huerter or Harrison Barnes were playing poorly. Both of them were playing poorly. He would step in, and he's not the greatest like perimeter defender. He doesn't move laterally very well, but he's going to give it his all out there and is better in that way than Harrison Barnes, I think, in terms of his defense and his rebounding especially. And so just another solid season from Trey Lyles. He's always dependable. And so I think, now we're going to start going through these guys a little quicker as we get deeper down. Let's go to Keon Ellis. Started 21 games this season out of 57 that he played. A guy that I liked last season in the short times we saw him and in the G League. But nobody saw this coming. There are plenty of people who love Keon Ellis. I'm sorry, nobody saw this coming. He didn't see this coming. Like getting converted from a two-way to a 3-year deal. But also, it was wild early in the season when he got the start. I mean, I loved it. I think the first game was against the Rockets when De'Aaron Fox was out. And so it was interesting him starting at the point guard, which I never really saw him as a point guard, but playing well. And then throughout the season, being in and out of the rotation, but always performing when he was in the rotation. And then Kevin Huerter going down and him taking the spot and running with it. Just becoming an elite defender towards the end of the season, shooting almost 42% from three. Also, it was very clear that he was developing more and more confidence offensively as the season went on, because you could see him doing more off the dribble, getting into the paint, playmaking more for others as he got into the paint. The offensive upside is super intriguing, and he's a guy that, I mean, he kind of saved the season in a way with the injuries that we had him being able to step in. I think every season you're looking for those guys that are going to step up. Every team is going to have guys that exceed expectations and guys that don't and are worse than what you expected. And Keon, very much the guy that exceeded expectations and actually was someone who the Kings were able to find as an undrafted guy and develop into a really, really good player. And I talked about before the season how it felt like the Kings never did that. It felt like the Kings always had second round picks that they traded, and then those guys became good, and you're like Gary Trent Jr.'s and guys like that. But now the Kings finally have one of those guys, and that's really cool. And it's huge because whether he can be a starter level player or just a rotation level player, that's massive, especially with the impending Malik Monk free agency. And like I said, kind of saved the season. Then let's go to Davion Mitchell, who had a really, really horrible start to the season. Lost his spot in the rotation, couldn't hit anything offensively from anywhere, and wasn't good defensively either, which was the really horrible part. People were just exploiting his size, and he wasn't really making an impact in other ways. And it was sad, but honestly, I gave up on him. I did. I'm not gonna lie, I absolutely gave up on him. And then towards the end of the season, he got another shot. Keon Ellis had taken his minutes, but with injuries and just Mike Brown always gonna give guys another shot. And he gave him another shot and just started knocking down like over 40% from three, was finishing at the rim, which he just could not do at all at the start of the season. He still doesn't have a floater, which would be really important if he could develop that, but was playmaking, was playing amazing defense. I mean, just a polar opposite from how he started the season. And so with him, it's just like, what's the true Davion? Like, what are we going to get going forward? This was only his third year, but at the same time, it was his third year. Like, we need to see something. And so he did show something at the end of the season, but it's like, is that just him reeling us back in? It was super important with the injuries that we had that he stepped up. With Malik Monk not being healthy off the bench, he was huge. And I just hope that he's able to continue that and continue to be a rotational player for this team. Then let's go to Sasha Vezenkov, who, was hyped up coming in. I was really excited. EuroLeague MVP, great shooter. And he showed flashes, but, the start of the season was very much him getting settled in. And you could see him improving, never quite could get that consistent offensive game. He's a smart defender, but not a great defender. There were some times, like against the Warriors, where he was like locking up defensively, getting a bunch of blocks. He had some really surprising blocks and steals. Not great moving laterally, and could just never really find his consistency. And right when it felt in the middle of the season that he was finding that consistency, he gets injured. And then he comes back for one game, gets injured again. And then came back at the end of the season, but could never really find his groove again. And so for him, I think in the time that we did see him, he showed why he was the EuroLeague MVP in being a smart player, but he could just never, and why he was the EuroLeague MVP, but playing off ball. He's a great cutter and great movement off the ball, and just obviously a smart player, but just couldn't find that groove. And he just needs to hit the three more consistently. And we heard about how, in the Kings drills in practice, he's the best shooter. And so I just have a lot of faith in him that he'll be better next season. He went through his first NBA season, through the ups and downs, through injury. And now I think that he's had time to kind of get settled in. I have a lot of faith that he can be better next season. And then we have Alex Len, who also struggled with injuries, but for him, early on in the season, it was between him and JaVale, who's going to be the backup center, and Alex Len won out because he's just so consistent in the 10 minutes per game that he plays. Pretty much, he's going to be a defensive presence. His net rating and defensive rating are super, super good, and he's going to set solid screens. He's going to rebound the ball. He's going to block shots. He's going to run the floor, and he's just going to be a consistent player, and that's what he did. And so that's important for just a guy who's just going to play 10 minutes per game behind Sabonis. And we can talk about JaVale McGee right after him. JaVale had his shot, and with JaVale, it's very much high highs, low lows. The high highs are him hitting hook shots and catching alley-oops from Malik Monk and blocking shots, and the low lows are him fouling unnecessarily and him trying to do too much offensively and turning the ball over or missing shots. And so we went with the more consistent presence in Alex Len. And with JaVale, everything that we hear about his leadership is great. And so I think that's where he really contributed towards the end of the season, is his leadership. He was always the guy in the middle of the huddle, hyping everyone up. And so obviously we can't really know, but from what people within the Kings organization say, it was about the leadership for him this season. Then let's go to Chris Duarte, who I was really excited about when the Kings traded for him. 2 second-round picks to the Pacers for Chris Duarte. And he had a wild season, I'm not gonna lie. Like, talk about him taking the starting spot in preseason, starting 11 games at different times in the season, and very rarely finding his offensive groove. But there were a couple times where he found it, and you could see when he was with garbage time units, he was the best scorer out there. Defensively, though, at the start of the season, fouling more than anyone else in the league in terms of fouls per minute. It's interesting now that more things are let go and you can play more physical defense. I wonder, how that would be with him. But he just was a little all over the place. It's his third season in the league, was injured a lot in his second season. And so he was disappointing. There's no doubt. When he misses from three, it's loud. I don't know. That's just something that I feel like with him. He misses badly. He definitely, Mike Brown preaches physical defense. That's what he tried to do, but he just fouls a lot, does not make great plays, doesn't always play within himself. And so he's a guy that I think could be better next season. Now with like Sasha Vezenkov, I am very confident he'll be better next season. With Chris Duarte, it's like maybe. I feel like there's a chance he could be a rotational player, but then I could definitely just see him kind of being the same Chris Duarte, who just never quite taps into that potential. I think we saw with like Donte DiVincenzo when he got traded to the Kings and he couldn't hit anything from three and was just awful. He was a guy I was really excited about, but he came off injuries and was just really bad. And now he's great for the Knicks. I don't expect Duarte to be as good as Donte DiVincenzo is now, but still, that's something that we can look at and be like, okay, we can have a little bit of patience with this guy. So not a good season, didn't live up to expectations, but maybe still something there going forward. Colby Jones, a rookie, spent a lot of time in the G League, not too many NBA minutes. There was a time at the end of the season where he kind of cracked the rotation, which was interesting, but could not get the 3-point shot to go down. And so that's going to be big for him for sure. But I think he showed that he's going to be a really solid defender, a very solid rebounder. I think he just needs to get comfortable handling the ball a bit in the NBA, in the sped up NBA. I don't know if he'll ever be like a true point guard, or he might just be that secondary guy. But I think from what we saw, I think he'll be a rotational player in the NBA in the future, but definitely needs to get better from the 3-point line. Kessler Edwards was an interesting one because he came in. I thought he improved a lot from last season. He's a really solid defender, really long and big guy. He does not hesitate to shoot from three, and he got better from three this season. Spent a lot of time in the G League as well. He shot 38.5% from three on, of course, limited attempts. But I thought he was a guy that we could have seen more of in non-garbage time minutes. He's only 23, and I think he's still interesting to me. I don't think he got a lot of opportunity, and so he's someone that I could see going forward. I feel like there's a group of guys. You have like Chris Duarte, maybe Sasha Vezenkov, Kessler Edwards, Colby Jones, like those four guys. It feels like at least one will be good next season, and we hope for two out of those four guys. Like two out of four of those guys. If 2 out of 4 of those guys could crack the rotation, that'd be great. And then just some other guys. Filip Petrusev, shout out for his 2 games that he played, his 7 minutes on the season. Shout out to him. Shout out to Juan Toscano-Anderson for his 11 games that he played. Our two-way guys, obviously Keon was a two-way guy, but the other two-way guys, Jordan Ford, just didn't see a lot of him. Spent a lot of time in the G League, was solid there. Jalen Slawson, very interesting. Again, not a lot of time in the NBA, a lot of time in the G League, but very much like an insane athlete. Great in transition, but we also saw that he can shoot the three a bit, and I think he also has good vision. He's a solid playmaker when he gets the ball. It makes solid decisions, I think, and then is just an incredible athlete. So defensively, that helps. Offensively, that helps. He can get some crazy posters. He also got posterized really bad in an NBA game this season. He was on the court for about 10 seconds and got put on a crazy poster. I forget who that was. Someone on the Bucks. Was it like Beauchamp or Green. I can't remember. But someone who's interesting for the future and maybe could get put into that, like, group of 4 guys that I mentioned that maybe they could make a rotation spot. And then Mason Jones, who was great in the G League and got the 2-way contract after Keon Ellis got converted. Putting up triple doubles, was really good, a really good 3-point shooter and a really solid playmaker. And so you never know, maybe he could be put in that same boat as well. Jordan Ford, no, he's not going to be put in that same boat. A great story, but Jordan Ford probably is not going to continue to be on a 2-way contract. But the other 2 guys in Mason Jones and Jalen Slawson, I think they'll remain on 2-way contracts next season. And I think they're interesting players. And so that is everyone. Yes, it was a disappointing season when you look at the results, but in a way kind of met expectations. Obviously, would have loved to make the playoffs, but I think you saw progression from this team. Growth is not always linear, and I think the path forward is clear. And so speaking of the path forward, I will be making an off-season preview video very soon, so keep your eyes out for that. And if you made it all the way through this very long episode, shout out to you, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.